Welcome to the SJ Child Show. This episode is sponsored by Water and Body Basics. Visit 3440 South, 5600 West, West Valley City, Utah. Mention SJ Childs today.
Hi, and welcome to the SJ Childs Show. I'm your host, SJ Childs, and today I have a very, very special guest, Dr. Barry Prizant. He is the author of Uniquely Human and also podcast of Uniquely Human. And I should have looked into more, but have you authored other books other than that?
Well, Uniquely Human is really the first mainstream book. But yes, I've authored 3 other books that are more kind of technical. The CERTS model, our educational model,
Yes.
and then some edited books. So that was more for kind of the speech language, special ed, academic community. Yes.
Wonderful. I'm so honored and just so happy to have you on here with me today. I personally, have been kind of living my life authentically through Uniquely Human style, basically, before ever having, read the book and being able to. So when I did pick it up and read it, I was so drawn to it and felt so resonated with your stories and just the view you are trying to give the world of what autism should be looking like to other people, and the way people just need to start treating other people like human beings, like we are, so that we can all come together in a much better way. So yes. I appreciate that. Tell us, what got you started in being an author? Was that something you had looked into before? Or?
Well, that's a great question. Naturally, being in academic settings for so many years, it was expected that I would do writing, but I always felt the need, because I started out my career as a summer camp counselor, as a teenager. So, I surprise people when I say I just passed my 50th year, not 15th, 50 year in the field.
Wow.
Because I started out when I was about 18 years old, 19 years old, as a summer camp counselor. But then I went into academics, and it required a lot of writing, but I always did want to write and reach as many people as possible. And so I did do a column for 5 years for a now extinct, it was actually a wonderful periodical magazine called Autism Spectrum Quarterly. And I have actually on my website, which is just my name, barryprizant.com, I have a lot of those articles as free downloads. Great. So I wrote about 30 articles there. And then so much of the way I've always taught was telling stories. And so this is kind of the story of Uniquely Human here. A number of years ago, my wife said to me, Barry, I learned so much about autism through your stories. And I mean, she's a clinical psychologist and a nurse, but
wow.
Her area is not developmental differences in people. Long story short, that really gave me the motivation to write a storybook from which people can learn. And that's what Uniquely Human is, as you know.
Yeah.
It's just dozens and dozens of stories. And some people pull away from those stories what resonates with them, as many of them did with you.
Yeah.
Or in some cases, I directly teach concepts in a way that's so much more accessible.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like I've been able to teach some of those aspects to people along the way now with my, with that knowledge. I've been able to help people to, if your child is struggling to go to this same building, let's figure out the why, what happened in this situation. I really learned a lot from that and thought about things in a whole new way, because I think that kind of, you need to just have like a light shown on it so you can look at it and say, oh my gosh, okay, this is different than what I thought it was, thumbing through the dark, now there's light shown on it and I can really understand how to help my child.
Yes. And, there's one thing I say, which I hope it doesn't insult people who do primarily research or live their lives in the ivory tower of academia. But I really feel the most significant changes in the world of autism and neurodiversity now have come about because of stories.
Yeah.
It started out, at least in autism, it started out with Temple Grandin, and now it's, a few years ago, I said dozens and then hundreds and now thousands
It's amazing.
of neurodivergent and autistic people around the world telling their stories, whether it's on Zoom, whether it's a live conference, whether it's in their writings, in their books. You just mentioned Eric Garcia, one of the latest books to come out. And I feel the biggest pushes in the field have come from the community, not from people doing experimental
Their
research.
masters. Yeah, exactly. No, and I do agree with that. And I do see so many, I have about a 650 member group in my community that I run. And I see like the parents that, go back to get their masters to understand, go out and do these things. And that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I feel like mine is kind of the same way, teaching people through my experiences, showing them that, hey, this is what I've learned from this experience, and this has worked, and this may not work for your child, but you could try it. And I think the best thing is for our parents to have an open mind about the expectations they have, because I think that that's where we've all kind of taken maybe expectations from previous generations and brought them to the table in our parenting. They don't work for this type of parenting style. It's a completely different type of parenting style. In fact, I used to joke around that it's like having a house with round walls. There's no corners. Everything is different than you're used to. You can't say go sit in the corner because it's round, right? You have to completely relook at the way you're looking at your environment and the way your children are reacting to environments. And so, yeah, I just always have been a big advocate and want to do the same, want to just like change everybody's views out there to the way I see it, in the way I see the beauty and the innocence and the amazing, brain power of autism, rather than the behaviors that people see. I don't see those things. I see those behaviors as being kind of, brought onto them more or less, rather than them bringing them to the family.
Yes. One of the things that I say, I mean, even the language that we use, in Uniquely Human, I make the point that probably autism is one of the few times where when we use the term behavior, it usually means something, quote unquote, that is challenging or undesirable.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how the field has been. And you just alluded to that. I mean, the news that parents got for so many years, and I am still shocked how many parents of recently diagnosed kids still get the doom and the gloom.
Absolutely.
And what motivated me to write Uniquely Human, in part, and it came out, it's hard to believe, 6.5 years ago, and so it was written like 8 years ago. But what motivated me to do that, in part, was trying to say, wait a second, in part, the professional community has been the community that really has perpetuated, don't expect a good quality of life for you or your kids. Yet for decades, I mean, I know so many families where I knew their kids when they were 3, 4, and 5, and they're 35 now.
Yeah.
And even though, yes, and I always try to make the point that there are real challenges, there are real issues, but I don't see what, it's a long story, but what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said a few years ago, that millions of devastated families, millions of children whose lives have been destroyed. I see families with challenges working hard to deal with that. I see a lot of happy families, but I do not see millions of devastated and destroyed families and children. 100%. Yet that is the narrative that is still out there. It's changed quite a bit over the last few years. But then people have swung to the autism is just paradise and all roses. And we can't go there either. No. We have to understand. And I think it's most, for me, being a professional and not having a child on the spectrum, for me, it's most respectful to say we can look at the cup half full, but still acknowledge the challenges and support families and support kids appropriately.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? And it is so, I just had an interview a few months ago with a trans autistic adult. And he was so incredible with his being able to share his story. It was so vulnerable. And the way he expressed the feeling when his parents had said, you know, we were just devastated when we got the news, and how much that hurt him. And it really made me take a step back and think, oh my gosh, I say that to parents all the time. I share that same sentiment with other parents. Excuse me. Pardon me. And now I step back from that, because now I've been, you know, when we know we can do better, now I have this information that could be slightly, you know, damaging to that person's empowerment, basically. And so now I'm leaning on, you know, when our daughter was diagnosed, it was just like excitement. And we were thinking, should we throw a party? Should we have like a welcome to autism party for her?
Yeah.
Right? Because I feel like the autism families that I have now in my life, we are such a tight-knit community. We love one another. We support one another. And I don't ever see, especially in our group that I run, I don't ever see people, you know, like being down on each other or anything like that. And I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful thing that we can all come together in this community. And it's like a special club, you know, that the rest of the world just doesn't even understand.
Well, you brought up a couple of points there that I want to follow up on. First of all, a little shameless plug here. This week, literally 3 days ago, I sent in the revised and expanded Uniquely Human book to my publisher. And that'll be out in April. And the reason I'm bringing that up, the first week in April, and I'm bringing that up because I end the book in an epilogue on the importance of autistic people and families finding their community. That you just expressed how important it is and how it's changed your life. I mean, you're not just finding your community, you're creating a community through your podcast. And so, I mean, that's just so critical. And the people who are, and in some cases, you know, suffering the most, who are so isolated, they have not found their community yet. I mean, look at all of the self-diagnosed or the recently diagnosed adults who went for decades, not even knowing they have a community out there. And then the revelation, you know, oh my God, I was just diagnosed and I just discovered this whole community of support. And people who know me. So that was the first point. The second point is with a little bit of a delay due to COVID, we are back this spring and doing our annual parent retreat weekend.
Wonderful.
So this is our 25th anniversary.
Oh my goodness.
25 years we've been doing a parent retreat weekend. This coming April, it's going to be on a farm retreat site up in New England, up in New Hampshire. And you talk about building community, 50 to 60 parents, many of whom don't, some of them know each other, but many of whom don't, many of whom I don't know until they come to the retreat. And that sense of bonding, that sense of it's either great to be back with our tribe or we have found our tribe. And the number one thing that parents say is we walk into the retreat, it's a weekend retreat, and it's kind of like, you know, we don't have to explain ourselves. We could say the most outrageous things that have happened to our family, sometimes outrageously funny, and people just get it. And that's what it means to be in a community with shared experience.
Isn't that the truth? No, I completely agree with that. And even though I haven't had in-person retreats, I often have just online support chats in our group. And to be able to get together and to listen, just like you said, listen to the sometimes absurdities that are just normal life for us, you know, it's ever evolving, isn't it? That is so funny.
And being able to share things that you would never share with other people because you have no 100%. Idea how they'd respond.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, I think for our family, what we really, why the community was so important for us is because we didn't get the same support from our own families. We've been isolated from our families. We haven't attended family dinners, get-togethers for over a decade, probably, or close to a decade. And that's a really long time to lose connection with family members because they have other expectations. They have other ideas of how we should be treating our kids or behaving
Exactly.
with them.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We finally were like, this is too much havoc. It's too much negativity and trauma for us to have to keep explaining, or have to pull the kids aside, or make them sit in a separate place, or it's just crazy, the things that
Right.
you hope that your own blood and family would be like, yes, we're family, everything unconditional, but it's not
Yeah.
so. It's not so when you have older generations that are less flexible to the
Right.
ideas that we have in today's society. So yeah, it's a tricky.
I actually have a recommendation, if I might just
I love
interject,
it, please.
because I mean, one of I'll just say it this way: one of the hallmarks of my career is I've always worked closely with families, and a lot of families are close friends, and I've seen the journey for 2-3 decades these families have been on. And what I always like to recommend under those circumstances, which is so painful, when you have to feel the best way is for us to distance ourselves, or people distance themselves, is, that in most cases, they're coming from a place of really trying to help, even though it may be judgmental help. So what I usually recommend is acknowledge their intention. Say, listen, I know you really care about us. I know you care about my child, but we have things under control. We're doing fine. This is the way we see it. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for really wanting to help, but we know what to do. Because sometimes, and I know some parents who admit it to me, sometimes they get angry when somebody, oh, your kid needs more discipline, or why do you do this with your kid? You should be doing this. And we say, oh, just shut up or get out of here. But it might be said in a very judgmental, harsh way, but usually it's coming from a place of caring. Yeah, I have some distance on this. I could say that because I'm not a parent experiencing that.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work, but it's worth a try.
Absolutely. No, I completely understand that. And a little quote my husband came up with for us, and kind of, our spiel, if you would, everything is a little bit of fear, a little bit of knowledge turns fear into understanding. And just kind of like you said, I mean, I have 7 children's books all about special needs. And the reason I did that was because I believe that children don't come into this world. They don't come up to these people with judgments. They don't come up to them having hate and discord for people or anything. They want to be knowledgeable. They want to understand. And without that understanding, sometimes it's fearful, it's confusion. You don't know how. And so when our parents take real control and say, we're going to teach our kids about 100%, the fact that there are 100% differences in our community, whether neurodiverse or not. Our whole world is made up of diversity. I don't understand how it's such a hard thing to accept for the general community. But it is so interesting. But I think that it starts with that. It starts with teaching our children, our special needs children, our neurotypical children, that differences make up who we are. And when you go into a relationship accepting and wanting to find out their differences, you no longer look at them as negative traits, right?
That's right. And I always like to emphasize, I can go into a classroom and a teacher's complaining about a child's behavior. Well, he's just manipulating me, or he just wants to control. I always bring it back to, would you agree that children on the spectrum, or children who are neurodivergent in other ways, maybe ADHD, maybe anxiety issues, would you agree that these kids have neurological differences that underlie what's going on? And for those people who can embrace that, you're no longer blaming the child.
Yeah.
But then you go back to that. And then I also really see when people say, I never really thought about it. Yes, I teach, I'm talking about a child on the autism spectrum, but there's a girl next door at home. She's really, really anxious. And I mean, everything from anxiety issues to some forms of mental, health issues. are all now being discovered as having a neurological basis.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the biggest problems that I see. People first blaming kids and then blaming parents for the way they raise kids,
Yeah,
for their kids' behavior.
right.
But if you could keep coming back to, I'm talking about facts here. I'm not talking about something I'm dreaming up.
Right.
There are neurological differences. So shouldn't we be understanding and supporting rather than just trying to change and make this kid look quote unquote typical or normal?
Yeah, I agree completely. In fact, coming back again to my own personal experience with that and having, a family member say, I don't understand why you are putting so many labels on your child. And it was in that I said, okay, now, would it be fair for my child if I kept her in a classroom where she wrote letters backwards, doesn't understand how to read, and we just call it that's what it is, and we don't really look at it and give her support and give it a name and give it that's not fair to her. That's not fair just because of your fear of labels or what the name of things look like. It's not helping her in her situation to ignore that the letter 9 and the letter P and the number 9 are the same in her brain. And that's tricky. That's really tricky.
And the damage comes when a well-intentioned teacher says, I just keep trying, she just can't learn.
She's too sweet. That's what they said. She's too kind. She's too nice. There's no way she has dyslexia. She's a smart girl. She's so
what does that
sweet.
have to do with what does that have to do with dyslexia?
Heavens, I know. I'm gonna have to go bring these two teachers in and have a little powwow with them. I think a little meeting of the minds.
Well, I mean, in a way, it is interesting that what they attributed was something positive. She's a very nice young girl.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
As you know, too often it goes the other way.
And that's that is so interesting that you said that. It is so often that it goes the other way. And so having, I think, this sweet young daughter that people were like, autism, like, why would you even say that about her? And I was like, well, because that's who she is. That's like, literally, this is her heart and her mind, the way she thinks. I mean, I've never, I feel like the basis of our family genetics are very highly intellectual. And boy, I'm enjoying every second of that in our home. As you could see with DJ, he's 11 years old. He speaks or has memorized, I should say, 109 languages. And
incredible.
The periodic table, he just, that's what he does all day long. And when we had him, he was diagnosed at 16 months, so very, very early. But when we took him to a neuropsych, when he was 8 and we had his IQ tested, the doctor said the same things as you had said previously. He'll never leave the house. He'll never have a job. He will, you'll have to teach him how everything was just so daunting and like this death sentence for us to have this child at home with us. And I was so disappointed in that session and the way that things happened. That gave me, it was very disconcerting because here I'm coming to you with this child who is 8 years old and is in a 10th grade math level. And you're going to tell me he has no future? Like, at this point, I think he can work at the FBI, come on.
and I mean, doesn't that kind of put a nail in the coffin of professionalism?
Right?
I mean, it's how can a person who is degreed, credentialed to be a professional, say things that he or she has no knowledge about?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things we're beginning to discover now, especially with adult diagnosed people on the spectrum, is how many people are successful in what they're doing. Exactly. If they're supported well, if they're understood. So people are saying things like that they said about your son with no knowledge of long-term outcomes of people with autism.
Right. It's like a fortune teller. I just paid $800 for this fortune teller to doom and gloom.
That's right. And it's just a shame because without being able to see, I think it says more about that professional saying that it does about the child. One of my favorite sayings is, over the years, I get to read lots of reports on kids. And if it's a very young, even if it's not a young child, and the report says, oh, whatever, Billy is non-communicative, that tells me more about the person writing the report than it does about Billy, because everybody is communicative.
Yep. You just didn't make a connection with him. So he didn't want to communicate. Yeah.
Or you didn't observe well what was going on. Or you didn't speak enough to the parents to tell you how he or she communicates.
So true.
Yeah,
isn't that the truth? And it is, you see, I'm so glad that today's society, they are, like you said, coming out in more of the thousands. And now you see people like Elon Musk coming out and saying, I have Asperger's. Well, doesn't that kind of put the cherry on top of the cake for people? Because here's someone who is, the richest man in the world, who people, if we would have gone with this doctor's idea that we had seen, this guy'd be still living in his parents' basement.
That's right. Yeah. And people who are listening now might say, well, Elon Musk, well, he's really an exception. I'm going to tell you a little story. I'm not going to mention the name because I don't want to talk about somebody, but I'm speaking now to a person who's a very successful producer for television shows and recently diagnosed, but he's an older man. And he said the other day that he was so uninterested in school when he was 8 or 10 years of age and often looking at the ceiling and zoned out that literally the teacher reported him as being on drugs. Oh. And so we're not talking about people, and he's extremely successful now. We're not talking about people who, when they were young, didn't show real issues. Yeah. Because there is this tendency, as you well know, to take people who have come out who are highly accomplished and say, well, that's a whole different group than what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's not always the case.
No, I completely agree. And, as people, my viewers and listeners know, you can go back through my podcast and see tons of success stories and from autistic adults. And they all are so very unique, and they all have challenges. They all have things that they've had to overcome, even to get to the level of success that they're at now. Just like I was telling you, just spoke to Armani Williams yesterday, NASCAR's first African-American autistic driver. Mm-hmm. And what an incredible guy. And, he said when he was, younger, and he didn't even know how to speak to people. He took extra speech classes because he knew if he was going to be a driver someday, he was going to have to talk to people. He was going to have to go outside of his comfort zone and be a public speaker. And he worked so hard on that. And I think that when people, they probably don't know that. They probably don't think, oh, this guy took 12 extra speech classes just to be able to give these interviews.
Mm-hmm. And how many times have you heard, I'm sure you've heard a lot, of people on the spectrum. I'm thinking of one dad who's an investment banker. And he said, the investment banking piece, it's like breathing air to me. The finances, the economics, the math, no problem. I have to sit home at night and read books about people to understand their facial expressions, to understand how I could be a more effective communicator. Yeah. And so that brings us right back to different brains. It's about respecting the diversity that you mentioned earlier. And that's what in the ideal of all worlds, that's what's going to make a much more compassionate society. Mm-hmm. That's going to reduce so much conflict. That's going to reduce so many mental health issues in people. If we just recognize the differences and with that understanding of provide the appropriate supports, the appropriate, job environments and the appropriate school environment. So important.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Let's talk a little bit about your podcast so that we can definitely get some people promoting that and going over and listening.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the website is Uniquely Human, the podcast.
Perfect.
So if you go to uniquelyhuman.com, you'll see all of our previously released podcasts. We also have discussion questions following each one. Some people in schools like to follow up. And we're approaching our 40th in the last little over a year that we've done. I like to practice what I preach, quote unquote. So a very dear friend is my partner. He's on the spectrum. David Finch. Dave is a New York Times bestselling author. And the name of his book, which came out in 2012, is The Journal of Best Practices. And it's about how he became, how he kept a journal of trying to be the best husband and the best father he could be. Because he wasn't diagnosed until he was married for 5 years and the marriage was falling apart. And the marriage is very healthy now.
Great.
His wife, who's no longer a speech language pathologist, was at that time. She's now a personal coach. And she diagnosed him 5 years into the marriage using a checklist.
ADOS right here, sat my husband down and said, "You have Asperger's, mister." So yeah, same thing happened here. That is such a funny story. And it's amazing too, when he realized he had, and he could put it all together, it was just like, yes, this all makes sense now.
That's right. Yeah. So Dave and I have a blast on the podcast. He has a great natural sense of humor. We've really developed this. I knew him ahead of time. We never lived in the same place. He lives in Denver and I'm in Rhode Island. But we worked together on a project a few years ago that it's kind of funny. We joke around the project, not due to anything about us, but the project fell apart. It was to develop a big center out in Colorado, and it wasn't well thought out, and it fell apart. But, make lemonade out of lemons. We became very good friends.
Yeah.
And then we got back together just about a year and a half ago with the Desire podcast. Has received wonderful accolades. I like to pride for me and Dave, we're ratings of 4.9 out of 5 on Apple Podcasts. And the people we interview say, this is one of the best and most fun interviews we've had. So what we try to do is strike that balance. And I think it sounds like you're doing the same, between approaching serious topics, but making sure that there's also a lightness.
Yeah.
And an appreciation for what happens when you live a life that's a little bit out of the mainstream.
That's right.
Or a lot out of the mainstream.
Yeah, definitely.
The old story of, people on the spectrum think out of the box. No. They don't even know there's a box there.
I know. That's why I say we're sometimes like gypsies that live in a home. Like, we have no ties to any rules, or, obviously we live by civil law. But as far as, just rules of when it's time to eat dinner, where you have to sit, or what time it is to go to bed when each person is tired, there's a specific, it's just doesn't happen for us.
It's what it comes down to is you establish and respect a different culture.
Yeah.
And of course, that's something that a lot of adults, some of the strongest advocates out there for autism, adults on the spectrum, are saying, please recognize we have a different way of communicating. We have a different way of approaching the world. One of my dear friends, very active online, Becca Laurie Hector. And Becca says, well, wait a second. You want to talk about a different culture? And she gives wonderful presentations. And she showed a slide of the kind of a preferred typical wedding for neurotypical people. And it's a noisy room and everybody's screaming and everybody's dancing. And then she said, and she's married, and she said, now here's at least my idea of a perfect autistic wedding. And it's just she and her husband in this beautiful wooded area on a cliff overlooking a valley, and it's just the two of them, and it's tranquil and it's calm. I'm not saying that's the same for all autistic people, but this point of, I think it leads to more respect if we say there are cultural differences that are based in neurological differences.
Yeah.
And I think gets back to that notion of find your tribe.
Yes, definitely. And just, give grace to one another, give grace to people, give understanding. Everybody's on their own part of their own journey. I remember when my very first interview, in fact, how funny, I would remember this right now, with Shannon Penrod of Autism Live. And I went on and she said, Sarah, we were talking about my children's books, and she said, I just love how each parent, each person, on the autism, in the autism community, finds their time in their place, in their own way. And we all rally around you, and we all respect it. We all are excited for whatever step that is, whether, your child got up and said good morning to you for the first time. I will never forget the first time DJ said thank you after opening a present. He must have been 6 or 7 years old. And I mean, by that time, we've gone through 6 Christmases, and never once had he ever shown or told us thank you. And oh my gosh, I can't imagine how emotional and blown away we were at that Christmas.
Yes. So. Well, I mean, being a speech language pathologist by training, it really gets to, what is authentic connection? Mm-hmm. And let me just tell you a quick story. It's on your point.
I love it.
I was consulting to a school a few years ago, and I was watching this child being drilled on giving longer and longer sentences to picture cards. The big blue horse is jumping over the fence. Good job. On and on and on. Okay. And I knew just from my training that he pretty much had memorized the sentences. He probably didn't understand what he was saying.
Yeah. And
yet this was credit as progress in communication. All right. Then as I was leaving the building that day, the principal, who I had met earlier, stopped me in the hallway and said, oh, Barry, Dr. Prizant, can I just say something to you? And I said, absolutely. And she said, little Stephen, who I know you were observing today and consulting for? I said, oh yeah, I just enjoyed watching him in his classroom. She said, he came up to me the other day and he said hi. And I wanted to cry.
Oh.
And he says, that's the first real reaching out. Because I would always say hi to him in the hallway. And he looked right at me and said, hi. And that connection. And I'm thinking of, boy, is that an incredible example of authentic communication and connection?
Yes.
As opposed to, in some cases, what we've been doing for years and thinking that's progress.
Yes. Isn't that the truth?
And so we have to think about that. We have to think about going back to what really makes a difference in a child or a person's life that improves not only quality of life for them, but improves quality of life for everybody around them.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Oh, I love that. What a pleasure and honor it's been to have you on today. I am so grateful for your time and so thankful to have you here. Before we finish, though, I mean, you did say your websites and things, but please repeat them again so that we can make sure we're able to, go and visit. And I recommend your book to, hundreds, thousands of people all the time. So you should have some more book sales. No, I'm kidding.
Thank you. You're so kind. One of the other things I'll say, again, I say this with pride, excuse me. The book and the new edition, the book currently is translated into 21 languages.
Yes.
And so the appeal is universal. And it's been pretty much up there as the best-selling book on Amazon for a few years in the category of autism.
Yeah.
And it's been a surprise to me that everybody from autistic people to parents, people diagnose themselves when they read the book. It's been embraced from a very, very wide range.
Yeah.
So my website is my name, barryprizant.com. Uniquelyhuman.com is the website for our podcast. Please listen to the podcast. We think you'll enjoy it. It is not academic. It's not spewing facts. It's Dave and I meeting wonderful people, as you do on your podcast.
Yeah.
And what else could I tell you? We will be posting soon information about the parent retreat.
Great.
And we're also doing a parent retreat training.
Ooh.
Where people come in for a day before the retreat. We do a full day training with them, and then they stay for the retreat, and then they bring it back home with them.
I love that.
So that's going to be the weekend of April 9th, 2022. What else could I tell you? I think so many things I'm involved in. I'm involved in the arts and theater and autism, a lot of other things. But
wonderful.
This has been a pleasure. And And thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, it's so nice to chat with you today. And I hope that we can stay in contact and
Very
you know,
much.
follow up with each other in the future. So thank you so much. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.